You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report. You can find him online at CorbettReport.com. He's speaking with us from Japan. Welcome to the show, James.
Well, thank you for having me on, Jim. Always a pleasure to be here.
Any reaction from that part of the world to the election of Justin Trudeau as Canada's new Prime Minister?
Not a lot coming from the Asian news wires, but I have been following some of the Canadian coverage and what it's going to mean. And of course, we're already starting to see what might be the beginning parts of the effects of this election with from a foreign policy perspective, with Trudeau at least saying that they're going to be removing fighter jets from Syria. But again, we'll have to see how that transpires. But no, not a lot of reaction from Asia specifically. I think some of the biggest parts of this, the real reaction is going to come in what comes or fails to come of various pipeline projects that will potentially have an impact on Asian markets, and we'll be obviously keeping our eye on here.
You're speaking to us from Japan. How is Japan's economy doing?
Well, about the same as ever. There was an interesting little bit of volatility in the USD-JPY ratio, which of course is really one of the things that is directly correlated into the S&P and the Dow Jones, so that you see when the USD-JPY is rising, you start to see that effect in the markets. And we saw some volatility here, but other than that, I don't think anything fundamentally is changing in terms of the Japanese economy, which continues to be faltering around under this Abenomics scheme that has failed to really ignite anything in the actual economy. All it's done, of course, is blown up a market bubble in the Nikkei index, very similar to the S&P Dow Jones bubble in the American context.
China is about to announce another 5-year plan. Do we know what's in that plan?
We don't know any of the specific details yet. Actually, I haven't checked today, so there may have been something come out, but I think we're not going to see anything official on this for another week or two. Basically, for people who don't know, every 5 years, China announces a 5-year plan for economic development, and this is done at a plenary session of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. And so basically they sit around, they review and discuss what has been proposed by various different levels of the Chinese communist bureaucracy, and they try to set an agenda for the next 5 years. And when it does come out in official documents, it's generally dense and jargon-laden and difficult to comprehend. So it has to be interpreted, I think, for the public by the Chinese propaganda machine. And on that note, there's an interesting video that's gone somewhat viral online about this 5-year plan, or at least introducing the idea to the public in a sort of music cartoon video way that's very strange. It has to be seen to be believed, but that's the type of way that this generally filters down to the public. But I think the one thing that everyone's going to be looking at for this that will, I think, have a lot of different effects is basically what GDP growth are they going to be targeting? And of course, they've been targeting 7% for quite some time. And wouldn't you know it, lo and behold, quarter after quarter, the Chinese economy comes in clocking at just exactly 7% GDP growth, if you can believe that. At any rate, they're going to be they will likely be setting a new GDP target for the coming 5-year plan. And people are looking at it probably being lower, just taking into account the slowdown of the Chinese economy and the global economy generally, probably somewhere between 6.5 and 7%, 6.5% being the minimum GDP growth that China will need in order to live up to goals that it has already set for its economy by 2020.
I found it interesting. I was watching a finance minister from China saying, well, when people say your GDP is overestimated, we calculate it differently than everybody else, so it's right on target. And I said, does that mean it's okay to have cities that you've built for hundreds of thousands of people that are empty? And she said, yeah.
Yes, of course. I mean, of course, projects like that people probably know about now, the giant cities that are basically empty and giant shopping malls and things that are being constructed. Just an incredible amount of construction that continues to go on in China. I think 4,000 new shopping malls being constructed this year. That's just a mind-boggling figure. But of course, that doesn't reflect any underlying economic activity in China itself. What it is of course a debt-fueled growth that is happening right now in the country because of policies that are being taken at the head. And of course, we should always keep in mind that back in 2007, the then former governor of one of the Chinese provinces and someone who went on to become basically the vice president under Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, admitted in documents that were then leaked to the U.S. ambassador that yes, the GDP in China is for reference only and is not. It's a man-made number. It's not meant to be an accurate reflection of Chinese economic growth. So, I mean, even if we were to take the bloated figures that take into account all of these shopping malls, these empty shopping malls and bridges to nowhere and other government make-work projects, even by that standard, the figures are still fudged. So take 7% growth or whatever they're claiming these days with a gigantic grain of salt.
Has there been any effect from China lowering interest rates?
Certainly not as much as they were hoping. There was a little bit of a market rebound after the interest rate cut, but basically it has failed to generate much momentum whatsoever in the Asian markets. And although we have seen a little bit of positive gains in the Nikkei, also we saw the ASX 200 falling. We saw the South Korean Kospi closing down 0.38%. So whatever they were hoping to ignite with that rate cut, it seems to have not really filtered out through the Asian markets.
Is there anywhere in Southeast Asia that's bucking this downward trend?
That's a good question. I haven't been following all of the different economies, so I can't say with any certainty. But I can tell you the industry that is bucking the trend, if anything, and that's of course the defense industry. And we saw that reflected in last year's numbers that came out earlier this year from CIPRI, where they were showing that the Asia-Pacific region as a region was the fastest growing region in terms of spending on defense, other than Eastern Europe, where of course Ukraine and everything surrounding that is contributing to their growth. But here in the Southeast Asia, or in the Asian region generally, Asia-Pacific region generally, of course the tensions in the South China Sea and the East China Sea are causing all the players to start spending more on defense budgets. And interestingly, Malaysia has just announced they're going to be cutting their defense budget by 2.25% next year. But other than that, defense budgets are generally rising throughout the region, and I think that's something we're going to continue to see, especially with some of the latest provocations happening now in the South China Sea between the U.S. and China.
Why is Malaysia cutting their budget, or have they said?
I think Malaysia is right now embroiled in a political scandal where their president has been, or their prime minister has been accused anyway of siphoning funds out of the main party, and I think this has caused a little bit of economic instability, and that's, I think, being reflected in the defense budget cut. But again, I think it's really the exception that's proving the rule in terms of Asia Pacific and the amount of defense spending that's going on there generally.
I know the U.S. is upset with China for building up reefs and creating artificial islands and so on. But in reality, isn't that the same thing the Netherlands has been doing for the last 400 years, creating land out of nothing from the ocean?
Well, yes. It's also a question of where you do that. I mean, there may be places within recognized territorial boundaries that can be done without any real legitimate complaint. But then there are places elsewhere that are hotly contested or are becoming hotly contested, so that when you find, the Spratly Islands or places like this, they're becoming flashpoints, and that's why I think anything that tries to change the reality on the ground is going to be met with a lot of consternation, and that's happening on both sides right now. And it's interesting to see how basically deserted island chains that no one's cared about for hundreds and hundreds of years are suddenly becoming flashpoints for potential conflict. I tend to see these conflicts as being more about diplomatic posturing and trying to play up to people's political home bases than any actual confrontation that's actually going to happen militarily. But with these types of situations, it's always difficult to keep a lid on that. You can't guarantee that some hot-headed naval commander or someone is going to lose their temper one day and start something that someone else is going to have to come in and finish. So it is, I think, worrying that this is happening. And I think both sides are being a little bit of brinksman with this, because I think both sides are fairly sure that the other side isn't going to fire first.
Well, I just heard the U.S. is sending an aircraft carrier task force to the South China Sea. Is that necessary, or is this just something that happens in that kind of situation?
My understanding is that they are going to try to invade the exclusion area around what China is constructing in the Spratly Islands. So they're basically, just like with the air defense identification zone that China declared a couple of years ago, which was immediately flown over by American planes, now they're going to be sending ships into a region that China is trying to claim maritime sovereignty over. So I think it's just a question of showing that that just because China declares something doesn't mean it's going to be an actual on-the-ground reality or on-the-water reality in this case. I think that's kind of what's going on here. And again, I don't think this is going to lead to any sort of direct military tension at this point. I don't think it's going to start anything, but it's part of a growing a narrative that we've been seeing here for years now, with both sides becoming more and more blatant in their attempt to stake out their part of the water there.
Someone said to me once, China isn't really interested in military confrontations. What they're interested in is economics. And if that's the case, why would they want to harm the U.S.? Because they're one of their biggest customers. Yes, that's true. But I think they're trying sort of to tiptoe in the other direction. They're trying to tiptoe away from that being the most important factor for them. So right now, what Xi Jinping has been concentrating on for the last few years and is really picking up steam right now is something called the One Road, One Belt policy, where they are trying to construct a maritime route and an on-the-ground route, basically connecting China to everywhere from Southeast Asia all the way into Western Europe. And as I say, there's a maritime Silk Road that they're working on that includes transportation corridors throughout the South China Sea and other water areas. And then there's an overland route through Central Asia into Europe that they're working on called the Silk Road Economic Belt. So I think they're trying to move away from being so heavily reliant on American exports and looking to open up trading amongst partners all over Southeast Asia, into East and North Africa, into Eastern and even into Western Europe. And so I think we're starting to see them try to move away from that. And as a result of that, I think they have to start scoping out some of their maritime sovereignty in the South China Sea in order to really secure that maritime Silk Road and effect that transition away from their American-dependent export economy. Is the Russian pipeline to China part of that deal? I think that's one of the things that factor into it, but perhaps in the opposite direction, because really, when you look at it, Russia and China are rivals in the Central Asian region. Russia has been has technically constructed its Eurasian Economic Union, specifically modeled on the European Union, but at this point really just a monetary concern. But basically, they've been trying to solidify their control over what has been traditionally the Soviet Union's backyards through a lot of the stands there in Central Asia, through this Eurasian Economic Union. But China is trying to create its Silk Road economic belts right through that region, and I think those are competing interests. So Russia and China are cooperating on things like the gas pipeline that they're constructing and deals like that, but they are also rivals, and I think there's an interesting tension going on there that isn't getting a lot of attention from a lot of the media. Is China's interest in Syria part of that idea to expand its influence? I wouldn't say so. I don't think China and Syria have a great deal. They don't have as much of a relationship, we'll put it that way, as Moscow and Damascus do. So I think it's interesting to look at what's going on there, but I think really it's just part of the construction of an alternative power bloc to NATO, and I think in that regard we can see the China-Russia cooperation. I think really China's basically just helping to buttress up Russia in that, rather than China taking any sort of lead in that. And I think they might expect some ancillary benefits if and when, Russia is successful in upholding the Assad regime. But I don't think China necessarily has a dog in that fight, economically speaking, at this point. There's not a huge relationship there. How's the BRIC Economic Bank working out as a rival to the IMF, BRIC being Brazil, Russia, India, China? It hasn't done an awful lot yet. And I think that what we saw with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank that Beijing constructed to great fanfare earlier this year is part of a diversification on China's part. So they're not simply relying on this new development bank of the BRICS.
I think they're interested in the AIIB, which is a more explicitly Chinese-controlled and Chinese-created entity. So the NDB is still moving ahead, and we just saw the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi make an announcement about how Africa is going to be a major area of focus for this new BRICS bank. But again, so far they haven't really done very much. They have authorized capital of $100 billion, but I don't know of any specific projects that have already started in regards to this. And I certainly haven't heard of any infrastructure or anything that's going into place as a result of this bank so far.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership, approved in principle by the 12 countries involved, but is it really going to happen? And what kind of a view do they have of it, say, in Japan?
I think it's certainly going to happen at this point. It's just a question of what the final wording of the text is, and I don't believe that has been released yet, but I think everyone's quite interested to see. But in terms of the response in Japan, I think much like in Canada, it's mixed, and it depends who you ask. But certainly for those farmers and people involved in agriculture here, I think a lot of them were strongly opposed to this deal because it opens up the Japanese markets to a lot of foreign competition, which did not exist before, perhaps in a similar way to the dairy industry there in Canada. But there are others who will obviously benefit from the opening up of the rest of the Southeast Asian economies in particular. So I think there's a bit of a mixed trade-off there for business interests in Japan. But again, I think it was something that was largely unpopular with the general public, but there were certain high-powered business interests that were involved in it, pretty much in the same as in the United States or Canada or some of the other partners involved in this deal.
Could one of those 12 countries along the Pacific Rim opt out of it, and how would their trade be affected by it? Or is this a case of it's so big and so monstrous that you really have no choice?
Yes, well, at this point, I think those who have committed to the deal in principle are probably committed to, well, either to implement it or to die trying, as it may be, because it isn't a done deal yet. I mean, obviously, in terms of the U.S. situation, for example, it has to be presented to the public, and then 90 days later, the Obama can sign it, and then it has to go into the Congress and Senate for approval through the legislative process. So there's still a lot of opportunity for it to be shot down in various ways. But having said that, I don't expect that it's going to be that much of an issue, especially in the American political context moving into 2016 election. I'm pretty sure that the candidates are not going to stake their candidacy on that, so I think they're probably not going to handle that hot potato. And of course, in the Canadian context, it's already a done deal with the election already having taken place, and it looks like Trudeau is committed to it equally as much as Harper was. So I don't think we'll see any great opposition there. Again, it's just the question of when, how, and in what way this can best be sold to the respective populations of those 12 countries.
And it seems a lot of the provisions are going to be phased in over several years. So if people do object, maybe they'll find out as it's eased in, it's not as bad as they thought it was.
It could be, or perhaps the effect will be so removed from the cause that people won't even be able to identify it. I mean, let's use NAFTA as an example here, because of course TPP is basically NAFTA writ large. If there's obviously huge changes that have taken place in the North American economy over the past 20 years of NAFTA, but how many people can really go back and identify specific parts of the NAFTA agreement as being the actual causes of this or that economic effect? I mean, that becomes very difficult to do. So I think the politicians who want this implemented have something of an upper hand with regards to this, because, again, if you remove the effect from the cause sufficiently, people won't be able to even identify what's really happening.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking to James Corbett, publisher of the CorbettReport.com. James, an interesting item on the Corbett Report. DuPont has lost the first of 3,500 lawsuits over Teflon poisoning. Can you maybe explain that one to us?
Yes. For those who don't know, there was a class action lawsuit is pending now against DuPont with regards to a compound called a perfluorinated compound, or PFOA, which has polluted the Ohio River and landfills in Columbus, Ohio, and environs over the production of Teflon. And this is dating back to the 1980s. There was a memo that reported a high level of birth defects in children of women who worked at that plant where this chemical was being used. So now that is going through the court system. The upshot of this is that the PFOA that is the culprit here is the probable link to kidney and testicular cancer, ulcerative colitis, thyroid disease. That PFOA compound is no longer used in the production of Teflon, but I guess the asterisk there is that it has been replaced by another chemical that has equally not been thoroughly health tested. So we could see more of this coming in coming decades. But yes, DuPont has lost a $1.6 million suit against one customer, and then there's another one that's pending. The trial is set for December 1st, and after that point, the class action with the 3,500 residents of the area can proceed, and at that point, we may be looking at a mass lump sum payout, but not by DuPont specifically, by a DuPont subsidiary that was spun off called Chemours, which was created seemingly, as far as I can tell, specifically to take the liability for this PFOA pollution.
Right, and of course they could always declare bankruptcy and wouldn't pay a penny.
That's always a possibility. We'll definitely have to see how that transpires.
We'll see if it sticks.
That was a very, very bad or very good pun, depending how you look at it.
James, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
Always appreciate it, Jim. Thanks for having me on.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of thecorbettreport.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at Talk Digital Net. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.